My name is Daniel. I'm a person who draws things. I don't really know if I should call myself an illustrator, or a fine artist, or a printmaker, but I do things and they end up in various formats. That's me. That's what I look like. If you want to talk to me later, because I sometimes have a little tiny face on the stage. Daniel Danger is not my real name. My real name is an unpronounceable Polish mess. It's not worth trying to pronounce or remember. Growing up, my parents were artists. My mom was a professional potter for 35 years going on. That's what she did in school. This is her in the 70s, and that's our old dog named after Rembrandt. My father was a middle school and high school art teacher. He now builds totem poles for some odd reason. Decided he wanted to build totem poles, and nobody argued with it. Both my parents are very, name something and they could do it. Woodworking, furniture design, photography, pottery, drawing, layout, computer work, anything. Just they got bored and started teaching themselves things. Growing up, because my parents were independent artists, they made pottery, they sold pottery. They made photography, they sold photography. Majority of my childhood was spent traveling to and from these big outdoor arts festivals all over the United States. Just from a little kid, parents would come in 3 o'clock in the morning, pick us up, bring us to the van, put us literally in a box, not in a seat, in a box, because there was no room in the van for seats when there's merchandise to be carried. So they'd lug us off to these fields. We'd wake up in a field somewhere in Vermont or whatever, and we'd spend the weekend, and sitting in the back of a booth. This is kind of my parents' booth would look like. The kind of stuff they did: lamps, photography, it's all sorts of functional stoneware. And this is important to me because they were not the 9-to-5 kind of artists or people. My concept of a job growing up and the concept of how to make money was this very independent commerce, independent work sort of thing. You did everything yourself. You made the pottery, you fired the photography, you made all the little labels, you boxed it up, you brought it to the show, and that's how you made money. The idea of a 9-to-5 job, even though my dad was a teacher, was sort of a foreign concept to me. And so when I started kind of getting into doing artwork, I couldn't really wrap my head around the idea of being a designer in a sense, or an illustrator in the sense of going to an office and being told what to draw and maybe getting a paycheck. I very much wanted to do as much of it as myself as I could, have as much control over it as I could, and for the sake of quality control and things of nature, I just wanted to, everything to be in my hands, and that kind of was this kind of ongoing thing. So it was really no surprise that, all these years later, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm traveling to these shows, I'm selling stuff that is entirely my doing, and handling every aspect of it. It's, I get no sleep at all, ever, but I really do enjoy it. So, like I said, I grew up in, I spent my entire childhood working at these shows, and there was a very interesting community because I was surrounded by, a seasonal family of, 100 artists and 100 independent craftsmen who this is all they did. They lived their life in vans and hotel rooms and their studios, and it was just something that really just, like I said, it was really important to me developmentally. The other fun part of it, or didn't switch, was I got to hang out with a lot of other arts kids, and there was kind of my brothers and sisters that I sort of spent my childhood with and grew with, and my friend Grace was a very, very important person to me. And we worked together at the craft shows. We grew up together. Her brother Sam. This is what we did after you were done at a show in a field. You're sleeping in a van. We built bonfires and hung out, and I spent my childhood and my teenage years sleeping in vans and kind of traveling around and just kind of being this sort of vague gypsy art lifestyle, and it was super important to me. My basic illustration influences: John Tenniel, the guy who did all the original Alice in Wonderland drawings and a lot of other great work. The very sort of loose, kind of staggered line work and hatching was just something that really appealed to me as a kid. I liked book illustration more than I liked anything else as a kid. The idea of illustration where the detail and the depth and the shadows were all controlled by a very technical line width and technical drawing rather than full-out shading was something I could really kind of wrap my head around. Ernest Shepard, the guy who did all the Winnie the Pooh drawings, as much as it's incredibly uncool to say that you really like the Winnie the Pooh illustrations, the guy was an amazing illustrator. I've for years considered getting these tattooed on my arms, and I'm sort of afraid that people just think very weirdly of me. Bill Watterson, is Calvin Hobbes popular? Was it here? Okay, all right, good. I wasn't sure. Bill Watterson is one of my favorite illustrators growing up because he worked in Sunday comics. He worked in a medium that was not necessarily well known for the last 30-odd years as being, kind of something where people spent a lot of time in the drawings. Was very like, the fact that the guy who does Garfield has like a factory, just kind of stamps in Garfield and that's it, He went way above the call of duty of what he needed to draw. Like, that tree is so, the perspective, how he draws it to detail was just more than he ever needed to do, and he did it because, he obviously loved his work, and he loved rendering things in this manner. Same sort of thing, this very kind of loose, sketchy line work, a lot of details and interesting perspectives just really appealed to me. And like I said, he was a beautiful artist despite a not very well-respected format. Jeff Smith, if anyone's familiar with Bone at all, very similar thing. Very minimal line, good strong shadows, and he did a lot with line work and just muted colors when he finally got into colors, whatnot. Probably the other big influence was being in a band. I've been playing in bands since I was just 14, just terrible punk bands. That's where my nickname came from, because I did that whole Ramones thing where you take your band name and put it at the end of your real name. It's not that fun. The same sort of idea kind of that came with being an independent band, the do-it-yourself thing, DIY. You book your own shows, you tour around, you make your own merchandise, you print your own shirts. Those same things applied to the art world, the same art things applied to the band world. Doing concert posters and doing the kind of work that I did and doing album cover work was a necessity when you were in the band. You had to do all those things yourself. The first concert poster that I saw that I looked at that I think stepped beyond the idea of the Sex Pistols-esque cut paper, photocopied punk collage, photocopied thing that was kind of prevalent when I was like 14 or whatever. The first concert poster that I saw that I just really kind of fell in love with, and I saw as something that was much more of an art form. And I'm not to say that the cut paper collages aren't an art form. It's just this was something that stuck in my head, and I immediately just was drawn to it, and I wanted to work in that way. So being a high schooler, I went home and just sort of knocked it off, because that's kind of the mentality that you get into. It's not to say it's the same thing. It's just I was trying to make a Jay Ryan poster with limited success. I was like 14 or something when I did that. We'll fast forward into my kind of college years. The first paid gig poster job I ever did, this artist named Jermaine Rogers kind of put me under his wing a little bit, and he gave me a job even though I was incredibly unqualified to do it. It was a silkscreen poster series for this band's tour, and I had never silkscreened a poster before, and I had to kind of wing it. I actually found my separations, which I thought was kind of fun, given that it was many years ago. Just some other kind of work I was doing in college. I didn't really have a direction I was going in. I wasn't kind of feeling my way around. Things were just really inconsistent. This is another silkscreen poster I did. I remade it a couple of years later just because I thought it was kind of a fun image. A few years later, Resident Evil kind of did something a little too close for my liking. But they're Capcom, and I'm a dude in a dorm room. They don't give a crap on me. I kind of was briefly doing some concept art stuff for some movies and things. I just couldn't wrap my head around it either. I mean, it's a very creative thing. I like concept art, but ultimately what it comes down to is you draw something, someone comes in and says, no, change this, no, change this. You draw something, and it's like, it kind of is like it's your creation, then it's their creation, it goes back and forth, and it's the same thing. I was just kind of uncomfortable with giving up sort of control. Like, I drew this, and I liked it, but then I had to spend 3 days changing it, and I didn't enjoy that. More paintings, getting kind of closer to an aesthetic that I would later kind of play around with, but still kind of aimless aesthetic-wise. I was drawing a lot of figures, and I kind of stopped doing that to a certain degree, but I did really enjoy it. Said more work, getting a little closer to what I kind of end up doing, but still kind of feeling my way through things. Same thing, started playing with red, kind of became a very dominant color for me for a while. These kind of rural woodland scenes became something that my head could kind of wrap around. Like I said, I grew up in the woods, I grew up in the forests, I grew up in these fields, and that's what, the woods is where I kind of felt safe. There's me filling my parents' living room with amps and guitars and mail order and driving them absolutely crazy because that room is still, 7 years later? That room is still filled with mail order stuff that I've left there and I haven't cleaned up yet. And they just really want to have a nice dinner and I can't have that yet. And I Need Sunny Days. It's one of the last lines from the book The Giving Tree, which is another book I really like growing up. The first kind of big art print I did that kind of set me down the road of doing art prints was this. It was just a 4-color screen print. I drew it as an album cover for this band Funeral Diner, and the label that released it and I decided, well, why don't we just kind of, for giggles, let's do some art print, like some silkscreen versions of it. Because I'd done some silkscreen before, and I worked in a textile printing shop, but I hadn't really done a whole lot of posters. So we decided, well, let's make 80 of them, thinking we'd sell maybe 20, because these are being sold to punk and hardcore kids, and they're probably not up for spending $20 for a piece of paper. That was the final result. It was printed by this guy named Lonnie Unitas with me. Still one of my favorite prints, even though it's very old. And the print actually was a huge success. It sold out in like a day or so. And it just completely took me by surprise that people, not say that they cared, but I was just surprised that I got such an immediate reaction to it and people kind of connected to it. And I got a lot of emails and stuff, people saying that it meant a lot to them, and that just kind of meant a lot to me. And it started kind of going down this road of really making sure that I was making work that people connected to. I used to live in Rochester, New York. It was kind of the opposite of the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in the woods and the kind of quietness, and then I was in this big industrial city, and it was like one of the most polluted cities in America. It was just it kind of just wore on me. And I kind of made this print about just how the city was just sort of this sick thing, like this living entity that had just picked up this virus. And I did this print, I almost immediately moved out of the city. Another kind of my more rural scenes, I kind of started playing with the idea of ghosts a lot. Ghosts are something that reoccurs in what I do and in my mind and in my dreams and just kind of everyday life. And I just liked these sort of quiet scenes where, they're not super high concept. They're just these very kind of quiet scenes where there's something just sort of unsettling about it. And what that is sort of up to interpretation. I made my titles really too small. This print's called "Oh My Snowy Ghost, Be Still My Roadside Monumental." Titles became very important to me because this is a very simple image. There's not a lot going on, but when you give it a title, and you give it this kind of title that's open to interpretation, it puts the image in a much, not to say a different context, but it gives it a lot more is going on. You can read into it more. You can kind of find yourself into it to a certain degree. I looked all night. I'm sorry, hon, but I don't believe it wants to be found anymore. That's the title of this print. I was down in North Carolina on tour, and I had this bracelet that Grace, the girl that I had grown up with, had given me. And it was really important to me, and I was changing after the show because it was some house party, and I was just drenched in sweat and other people's beer, and it was unpleasant. And I lost this bracelet in a field. And so I just spent all night looking for it, and I called her, and it was kind of this very defeated thing where I felt really bad that I lost her bracelet. And it kind of goes back to this thing where I was starting to see the importance in putting myself into the work and putting myself in personal experiences into these pieces. Because it makes the prints more important to me. It makes them as sort of a document of my life and a document of things. But at the same time, it's a quote and it's a title that a lot of people can find something to put themselves into it. they have a very similar, everyone has a very similar story of losing something that is really important to you but seems trivial to someone else. Like, she's like, so you lost my bracelet, not a big deal, but it was important to me, that sort of thing. This is slightly a bummer topic. Please don't worry, when I wake up I'll be something new. Grace, the girl that I had grown up with and was my favorite person in the universe, very arguably my muse in that sense. I know the concept of a muse is sort of a dead concept to a lot of people, but it was really important to me. She was a huge supporter of my work. She was just this part of me and everything. She died in a car accident, 2005, and it destroyed me. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And so I sort of put myself in my work, and it was the first time in my life I was finding myself really wanting to do work, wanting to do personal work, wanting to really slave over something, slave over a piece for the sake of working through it. And I did this was a 6-color screen print. I did it for her family. She was a very strong believer in reincarnation. She talked about it a lot. She talked about for years leading up to the accident. She said if anything ever happened to her, to not worry because she'd come back as something new. She just repeated it. It was in our brains, and after the accident, we all kind of thought about it. Not to say that we were okay with it, but we found a lot of comfort in it. And it was a statement, like I said, that a lot of people just found a lot of comfort in. I made a huge stack of them. I gave them to her family, said, give these to anyone who knew her, anyone who might have known her, anyone you wanted. And if you ever need more, let me know and I'll make you more. It's the one print that I do an open edition of, because it's a print that I want available to anyone who would ever want it. It's like the cheapest print I do. You ask me, I'll pretty much just give you one, because it's important to me that I spread that kind of message around. I said this was just a phenomenally important piece to me, and it set me down a direction of like I said, really, really putting myself into work, and that being really crucially important, that every piece have some sort of meaning to me. Otherwise, it's not worth putting out there, because people aren't going to connect to it. Just still on the kind of the Grace tip, she found her way into my work for years. I did a lot of paintings of her after, just as a means to deal with it. And that's my studio office now. It's the painting's above my desk. It bums me out every day, but I'd say it's good to keep her around. Sink or Swim So Cautiously, My Breath Is Just Falling Out of Me, is a painting that I did for was working with a band, and they kind of wanted me to do this sort of kind of ocean-themed thing, and they wanted it, in kind of the style that I was kind of working with at the time. I did this very big painting. I'm not much of a painter, and I wasn't much at the time. I enjoy painting, but it's something I kind of struggle with because I don't have the technical training. And I did that painting, and I really wanted to make silkscreens of it because silkscreens are my sort of preferred medium. I like figuring out how colors lay. I like figuring out how ink is going to react with each other. It's a total nerd thing, but I love ink. I love how ink lays. I love how ink can get really thick and build up, and just be this whole textural thing. The print, actually, can I go back? No? Guess not. The print was a challenge for me to figure out how to silkscreen, because paintings are the opposite of what silkscreens tend to be. Silkscreens tend to be flat colors that overlay in line art and in bleed colors, and there's a certain mindset to how they work. Paintings are tiny, tiny dots, and they're swirls, they're fades, they're blendings, they're not something that lends itself to silkscreening. And I tried for maybe a year and a half to get someone, and I kind of jumped out of my typical mentality of kind of doing things myself, and I was trying to get someone to do the silkscreens, the separations for me. And I just wasn't having any luck. And eventually I found this artist friend of mine, Nick Bohack, who lives in San Francisco. We have to do this ourselves. We have to figure this out. We can't wait for other people anymore. So we spent probably 3 weeks staying up till 6 o'clock every morning just doing tests and pulling the files apart and scannings and making new things, just trying to figure out how to do it. Eventually figured it out. And I went to a print shop in Portland, Oregon called Diesel Fuel, which is one of my favorite print shops in the universe. The people who work there are amazing. I just flew out there. I spent a week and a half, 2 weeks there, and we did this thing. We set it out as set it out to 15 colors. We ended up at about 13 colors. It's kind of stepping us through doing it. Just gallons and gallons of ink. That's Andy Diesel. He runs the shop. If you guys have ever seen the Mean People Suck sticker, he's the guy who made that. Just a fun piece of trivia. What paid his bills for years. That's Ben. He's the other printer at the shop who was running the press with me. We kind of step through these. These are we're just stacking colors on top of colors, colors on top of colors, and they all look very similar, but they're just a dark blue, a slightly lighter blue, a slightly lighter blue. It's printed vaguely like a topographical map is the best way to explain it. The peaks of the mountains are the highlights of the print, and it kind of fades down. Because I said ink is very thick, it's got a really good texture to it. The final result is just very it doesn't look like a silk screen, but it is, and you can look at it close and you can kind of figure it out. But it's got to a feel to it that you wouldn't normally see, and it's something that was really exciting to me on a technical level, because it was something that it was a battle that I won. I had been trying to do this for 2 years. It wasn't working, and I couldn't get anyone to really kind of to do it for me, and I eventually kind of did it myself, and I won, and I was excited, and I just it was a kind of a big victory, and that's my lunch apparently. Those are the racks. We printed about 250 to get 200 good ones. More stepping through, more colors building up, more colors building up. There's me, very, very tired looking. I think that's when we're up at about 9 colors maybe. Going through. That's a very big check that I wrote because I thought writing big checks was funny. The next print that I did with him, I made a bigger check, and then the next print I did with him, the check was about the size of this thing. I found this huge piece of paper, and I wrote this giant check. It had big cartoon cats on it and stuff like that, because kitty cats checks were funny to me. The final result print ended up being a little different than the painting, but I think even better. I think it was more vibrant and more striking. The darks were a lot stronger. That was the final printed sheet. It's a little weird because the black paper reflects funny, but this is kind of a close-up of what it is. It's very, like I said, it's very, very grainy and very grainy, and there's just a lot going on. But like I said, it was complete total victory for me. Later print I did Let's Be Kings with crowns of leaves and thorns from trees. Just me kind of going back to these kind of quiet rural scenes, hiding some creatures in there, just kind of making it not supernatural, not necessarily scary, but just sort of kind of a slightly unsettling thing. This actually later ended up getting used for a Kelly Osbourne record. I don't really want to talk about it, but. What was funny though is that it was a Christmas record, and she sang "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and her rendition of it was awful. She can't sing. The girl cannot sing in the least bit, and they auto-tuned her voice completely. Auto-tune works in this way where it basically uses a computer and it raises and lowers your pitch, but she was so all over the place that she just sounded like a robot. The computer didn't know what to do with her voice. And I actually hid the word auto-tune on the cover of her record. If you flip the record upside down and then read from the moon over, it says auto-tune, spelled out tree branches. The funny part was the label, I actually told the label, and they didn't care, because nobody gave a damn about Kelly Osbourne, I'll be beginning of a tradition of me hiding things in people's covers and prints and whatnot. Kind of going through some gig poster work that I was doing at the time. Was kind of what I called my day job. I worked in a kind of method where I was going to do posters for bands, but I was going to find a middle ground between my aesthetic and theirs, because I felt that was just really important to not be, like I said, I didn't really want to be an illustrator for hire. I didn't want to be told what to draw and then have to live up to the expectations of what the person already has in their brain. I wanted to work in a method that said, this is the aesthetic that I like to draw. If you like my work, I'll make you a poster that I think fits your band. I'll work on lyrics. I will kind of go from there. And it was a good way, and I got a lot of work doing this, and people really reacted to it really well. I worked with some bands I really necessarily didn't like, but I like the poster. This point, I think this was around 2006, 2005, somewhere in there, I rented a very large studio space in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts. And it's I found a warehouse that I could get pretty much the entire warehouse for $500 a month, and I thought that was great. What I didn't know was that that place got about 4 degrees during the winter. There was no heating. There was asbestos everywhere. So, but whatever, you know. I had a big fort. I could play drums at 3 o'clock in the morning. I could ride skateboard down the hallway. You know, it was the end of the. They ever seen the Ninja Turtles movie where they have the Foot Clan thing that's in the factory and all the kids are just doing whatever they want? It was kind of like that, except I made work. That was my banner, my easel my dad made me for my birthday, and there's me kind of looking creepy in the bottom. That was a facto drawing of the outside of the building. It was, in the most kind of cliche, generic way, I thought it was really amazing that my shop, which was I was the only tenant in this entire building, and I had this big sign on the roof that in big glowing letters that just said, Tool Company. I just thought it was funny. Another gig poster and art print that I did a gig poster of it, and then I made an art print of it as a kind of a gift to one of my friends. She was obsessed. She had a keytar. She was really obsessed with it. She really wanted a drawing of her with her keytar. My white dress won't be seen in dark light. I promise not to hurt your eyes this time. Ollie, ollie, oxen free. I kind of started playing, kind of going back into these kind of ghost girl figures and putting them in these very kind of quiet rural landscapes. The town that I grew up in was a lot of junkyards and things of that nature, and I liked the idea of these kind of spirits sort of floating around there and whatnot and hiding from people. And this was kind of, I was getting to a point where my titles were starting to make a little less sense. They were starting less, not to say less personal, but they were a more masked version. They were a little more lyrical, and they were a little more open to interpretation, I guess. I write probably a lot more than I actually draw. And because I said titles are very important to me, I like kind of playing with that. Around this time, I had one of my first gallery shows. It was this artist named Justin Meyer-Staller, who does these amazing, huge 4-color intaglio prints. Our work could possibly not be any different, but it was a good match for us. We've played in bands together for years. He's still in my band now. That's my amp there, my favorite thing in the universe. I did a triptych set for 2 years ago at this point, called We Were Fortunate. There were no cameras, no helicopters, no sirens for our return. So with a quiet kiss and a single step, we had given ourselves to this place. The town that I grew up in, I'm gonna make this really short, it's kind of spooky. The town that I grew up in had no crime. It was just a small town in Massachusetts. Our police report at the end of the year was just like a single page. It's basically like, oh, there was a home break-in. There was someone ran into the gas station at Cumberland Farms. There was a guy got drunk and passed out in the well, that sort of thing. So there was a span of time in the kind of late 80s to early 90s where there was a string of kidnappings of children around New England. And for some odd reason, and nobody's not sure why, their bodies kind of ended up in my hometown, in the woods. And it was a really, really messed up time to grow up in, because I was kind of a child at that time. And our parents kind of drilled it into our head that this place that I had grown up believing was this very safe haven. It wasn't the big dangerous city where people get stabbed and mugged. It was this quiet town. It was suddenly this very dangerous place. And it really threw me off, and it really threw a lot of people off. And it was kind of convinced to us that if you went outside, you were going to get kidnapped. It was inevitable. We were just kind of just living in fear, and our parents, I don't think, even realized how much they were kind of messing with our brains at the time. And so I kind of played with this idea that this is the printed version of it. It was silk screen, very similar to how the ghost ship print was done. I kind of played with this idea, and it was a very dark idea, that if it was inevitable, it was going to happen anyways, they should just do it on your own terms. Go out in the woods, dig a hole, crawl on the ground, and go at peace. And it's a tough concept, but the reason I think it's important is because does this back button really not work? Guess not. The reason I think it's important is because this image on its own there's not a lot to it. There's these kind of spooky spirits rising up into the sky and kind of filling the space, and it's this very kind of peaceful, ethereal thing. But the title is what gives it its power. The title is where I put my personal influence in there. And the moment that title's in there, the whole piece takes on kind of a life of its own. It's still open to interpretation, but there's so much more weight to it. And that weight is really important, I think. Like I said, it's just really kind of easy to lose yourself, and it's really good to document things about yourself. And in this case, I think this is a really good document of something that was a very big part of my life for a long time. very scary part of my life, but a big part of my life. I am a rabbit out of room. If you trick me, I will run. This is sort of where I started kind of playing with really focusing on drawing light instead of drawing shadows. Since most people draw with black ink, you know, they work and they kind of draw the shadows. I could wrap my head around easier with drawing light. You know, starting with a black piece and just kind of working up from there. This print kind of translates weird to this kind of pixelated look, but this is when I started really getting into hatching and really kind of fine line work as kind of directional and dimensional sort of feel, I guess. This was at one point used for Modest Mouse, a band I really enjoy. About 2 years later, I did a silkscreen version of it, and then 2 years later I worked with a letterpress guy who worked down in Rhode Island, and we did this really kind of amazing, like 3-color letterpress version of it. I'd never worked with letterpress before, and I just I had a really good experience with it. I like playing with new mediums and new printing methods. I learned a lot from that sort of thing. There's nothing out there. I do not hear what you hear. My family has a house up in New Hampshire on this kind of very quiet lake. And it's this, the acoustics, because we're in kind of a private cove, it's this very old, you know, the house is worth probably $30 maybe. It's barely standing up. It's out in this private cove, and the acoustics are very strange in that you can be sitting outside at night and you can hear people a mile away, and you'd hear kind of bits of conversations just sort of kind of drifting through your head. And I have very bad hearing because of the whole band thing. It's kind of a mess. So my girlfriend, because we go up and we kind of hang out there during the summer because it's just quiet and I like it. She was constantly hearing these people talking, and she was getting really freaked out because there's no one around. You know, where are these voices coming from? I was having to explain, oh, well, they're about a mile that way. You know, there's some people having a bonfire. And it kind of threw her off, and just a really kind of a fun, kind of slightly creepy, but slightly kind of interesting thing. So I made this drawing of it. I separated it out into an 11-color screen print. I went back to diesel fuel. Well, these are me prepping some boards because I printed some on some sheets of wood that I stained, and that's my father helping me in his lumberyard sort of thing. Same thing. I went back to diesel fuel, worked with them again. Like I said, they're one of my favorite people to work with. That's pizza. I love pizza. Just kind of going through. I'm surprised Andy's not flipping you off because he constantly is showing his middle fingers. Discuss mixing inks on black paper is a really tricky thing because all black paper is it's not made of black ink, it's made of like 50,000 other colors. So depending on what make and model of black paper you have, ink lays differently on it. This color here is yellow ink on black paper. It sinks down to a green. You know, this is a very bright blue that was on black. It sinks down to this very dark thing. So you have to print colors. You have to print inks depending on what the final color is going to be, not what the ink color is. So you're mixing colors, and it may look right, but the moment it's on the paper, it completely changes. And you have to kind of wrap your head around how inks changes, and depending on what paper you're using. And it's a really fun puzzle to work with. And this is a good example of different colors that we were playing with, trying to get this proper green color by mixing these colors, and the results were just drastically different. Like even just a little bit more of yellow, or a little bit more of blue, or a little more of this and that. Really changes how the ink lays on it. And we had to just keep doing test prints to really get it right and to really kind of nail in that color. That's Nick. He's another printer at Diesel Fuel. He took over towards the end of the project. Kind of keep printing because I was trying to print. I'm printing light. I'm printing drawing light. How that light is viewed by the viewer is how those kind of highlights work is super important. So we kind of figured out this cool trick where we'd print yellow, it'd sink down to the kind of muted green. We'd take silver, we'd print silver over the windows where we wanted the brightest highlights to be. And then we printed yellow over that. And you can't really tell here, but the yellow there in those windows just really is just like super bright. And it's really kind of amazing how just a simple little printer's trick can really kind of make a print pop out like that. That was the final print of that. I've done a couple toys. Tara, I don't think she's here. Wow, okay. I got the 5-minute moat. I did a couple toys. I did a production toy. It was a nightmare. It took 2 years to get done. By the time it actually got to me, I wasn't really happy with that design. Some more geek poster work. I did a poster for Amelie, the movie. I liked it. I thought it represented the movie well. People hated it. It was trashed on the internet. People just thought it was the worst representation of the movie ever. I think they just didn't see the movie that I saw, I guess. The biggest screen print I've ever done, it was a 3 by 4 feet. Trying to manage those and ship those was an absolute nightmare, because it was like trying to ship a blanket without folding it, sort of thing. It just doesn't work. I did a print for a Stan Lee of Marvel Comics. It was a kind of big hero of mine growing up. I did a print for like a tribute show to him of Doctor Strange's house. Got to meet Stan Lee at the opening. For some odd reason, I've never been able to figure it out. Stan Lee punched me. I don't know why. He just went boom, and he punched me, and this is me actually getting hit. I've never been able to figure out why. He really liked the print, and then he just punched me. But however, being punched by Stan Lee is not something you really complain about in the life, the life things. Another show I did down in North Carolina, some paintings I did for that show. I kind of started getting back into painting. I'm gonna kind of breeze through this because I have my 5 minutes. I did a box set about a year back, just a bunch of screen prints that all kind of touched on this topic of that idea kind of mentioned earlier, where these other people's phrases and other people's conversations are sort of drifting to your head through the atmosphere. If anyone's familiar with number stations, it's a really good Google read or Wikipedia read, and I like the idea of these parts of other people's lives kind of drifting into your own through your subconscious, and you're not sure of the context and what they mean. Another piece I had done for that box set. I got really obsessed with these kind of ghost roots and ghost trees, kind of filling up our kind of my quiet rural landscapes, and those kind of represented the kind of the phrases and things that you were kind of getting put into your brain. More these kind of Dust Bowl-esque houses, and more kind of growing ghost trees, and it was a really kind of fun thing to play with. That's the bottom of my road where I used to live. Those are the box set hung in a gallery show that I did in Chicago. And we're kind of getting into, I'll kind of go through some of the kind of recent work that I've done. Everything still exists. We need to keep moving. It's a little hard to tell, but it's this girl kind of buried in the forest, and she's got a bunch of arrows shoved in her. And it was kind of done at this kind of panic time in my life where I was convinced I needed to move on from what I was doing and kind of keep bursting forward. All around the ground, we'll see a flashlight metronome that skips to sleep and leaps. This is another print that references Grace from earlier, of life of wandering through fields with flashlights. I got really into doing clayboard scratching, which is basically, it's like scratchboard, but it's much thicker, and you can kind of work back and forth. And I started doing these very time-consuming, very super detailed prints of, not prints, these were originals of just these kind of very same aesthetic, but much different stylistic thing, much more labor-intensive. Another print, we were waiting at the seams, bursting but through quiet means. Another close-up of the kind of the line work that I was doing. I got really into I don't want to say technical, but very like spaced, kind of perfect line work for me, but still very shaky feeling that I really liked. The medic, I like deer, I like elk. Lock and key or latch key, a house you checked empty. This is a print I did of an old factory mill building in Massachusetts near where I was. It's a reference to a John Singer Sargent painting, The Daughters of Edward Darley Bolt, one of my favorite paintings of all time. That's my then girlfriend really not being pleased that I told her to stand next to it for size comparison, because she's kind of short. She didn't like being told that. Don't touch anything of all you keep. Don't touch anything you don't plan to leave. Another print that kind of represented a certain time in my life where I was having to kind of put some baggage behind me and kind of take only what I needed. And I wanted this big kind of burning house. I'd sink to your city streets if I wasn't buried in your hands. This is it's in Manchester, UK. I did it for a show out there. This is actually in Manchester where I had a show at the Richard Goodall Gallery. Go through that. I don't like to be seen in the parking lot between the movies and the drinks and the glass, whatever the hell that means. It's a reference to me going home after being away for so long to my hometown and being terrified that people would think I never left. I started kind of making these big, huge, shadowy characters as a reaction to the small, gentle characters that I was drawing before. You know, if these little tiny ghost girls represented all the good feelings about people and the good memories and that they exist, the ghost, if that was the ghost of those things, what is the ghost of the bad things? What is the ghost of all the heaviness and the weight that came with all the things that I had kind of seen? So I kind of made these big kind of monsters as these sort of lumbering ghosts that would kind of stumble over these sort of sleepy New England towns. You push and pull like wolves at the door, but all I hear is humming. That's the piece that you've probably seen in a lot of the advertising. Same thing. It's a little hard to tell, but there's a little tiny girl, and she's kind of, observing her opposite, up in kind of clambering over some billboards in the city. Regardless of everything, I came to know you as a relic. More kind of the barns and big windmills from kind of around where I grew up, and just kind of referring back to the idea of all the kind of kids that were all found and all these kind of horrible things that happened, but trying to present those things in a very like beautiful and kind of quiet state. Did a couple paintings like this, like a progress. This was when I was getting back into painting a little bit. Another one, wood skeletons placed in foundations. We were never of the nature to keep moving. Same thing, school bus. I like school buses. Those are the full-size paintings. They're about yay tall. They were shown in a gallery show that I did in San Francisco over the summer. This is one of the most recent prints I did. Has Thou Slain the Jabberwock? Said I was really into John Tenniel, and he did that amazing drawing of the girl kind of holding the sword like this. I got really loud there for a second. And I kind of wanted to do my own version of it, kind of with my kind of shadowy figures and little girl with the sword, kind of dragging it through the forest. Once again, a very, very labor-intensive thing that I really put myself into because that the drawing kind of references John Tenniel, references Bill Watterson in that if you know Bill Watterson's work, this sort of shading on the trees and this sort of dimensional work, which is actually reductive, is a trick that he kind of I don't want to say pioneered, but he made me aware of it at least a bit. Very quickly go through some gig posters that I'd done. Flight of the Conchords, Andrew Bird, who I love. I love Andrew Bird. I love everything about him. Decemberists. Ironically, they said I did the painting based on a song on their newest album, and they got back to me and said we probably don't want to use it because we don't really want more posters that feature nautical themes. And my response was, well, you should stop singing about nautical themes if you have a problem with it. Mogwai, one of my favorite bands of all time. Big car on fire. There's nothing that says Mogwai like a car on fire. Royal Tenenbaums, great movie. Sonic Youth, another fantastic band. Big radio tower and kind of one falling over just to kind of represent how they approach music. A close-up of the Royal Tenenbaums. This one got me kind of a lot of press because people just really liked it. It was really fun project to work on. Wes Anderson's got a really kind of good visual eye, and it's kind of the opposite of how I think, but it was definitely a fun project to work with. Why? Another group I really like. Close-up of that. And I came to know an Archer, kind of going back to the sort of spooky rural scenes of this kind of girl defending her home. There's one of those out in the hallway. It's on the wall back there if you want to see. There's a couple of these posters on the wall. They're not for sale, but you can look at them because I think, that's thing. I'm probably getting that look, aren't I? I'm right at the end. The band Aloha, if you've ever heard them, they were great. I just finished their layout for their new record, so this is kind of the first time people are seeing it. I wanted to do this kind of 1930s Great Gatsby-esque garden party. There's my sketch. My sketches are horrible. I don't spend time with sketches. The interior of the gatefold is this big kind of overgrown inside of a house. And then most recently, and I can actually show this now because it got released, I did a print for the TV show Lost. And this is Locke finding Jacob's cabin. A really fun project to work in because there's such a good mythology to that show, and it was kind of fun to put myself into it and kind of find my aesthetic in it. And this is us at a bar the other night, and that's what I got for you.